The key to setting these boundaries is knowing your limit. For vertical asymptotes, you find the limit of your function as x approaches your restriction. In this case, it is 4. If anyone attacks your vulnerabilities from both sides, and they are always unable to touch you, you have clearly defined your boundary. In other words, the result of your limit should be infinity or negative infinity. To find the horizontal asymptote, take the limit of your function as x approaches infinity and negative infinity. This method is designed to help you look ahead, to see if there might be another boundary you must set. After taking the limit, if your result is a number, then a horizontal asymptote exists. It is important to know yourself, to be able to determine what makes you happy or sad. Being able to understand your own emotional reaction is the first step to change. Also, negative moods should not always be perceived negatively. After all, change is needed from positives to negatives, and vice versa, to reach a critical defining moment of our lives. To understand your emotions, you must take your problem and dissect it. Determine the critical moments of your life that have led to your current situation. Test out what your emotions were before and after these critical moments. In order to do this, you must take the derivative of your problem. Instead of a whole bunch of convoluted curves and twists and turns, this will help you look at your situation in a straightforward, simple way. To take the derivative of your function, apply the quotient rule and the power rule. Then set your derivative equal to 0 and solve. Doing this will help you determine the low and high points of your life because you are essentially saying the slope is 0. Solving for anything in the denominator will give you a restriction. Next, use a number line to test out the intervals between the critical points by using the derivative. If you get a negative number, this indicates that you are sad. In other words, your emotional happiness was decreasing. If you get a positive number, this indicates that you are happy at this point in time. In other words, your emotional happiness was increasing. Now, it is also important to analyze the high and low points of your life. The high points and low points in life are inevitable periods of growing up. It is important to realize that low points are not necessarily bad. They are critical defining moments of our lives that really determine the shape of the path we have ventured. To find them, take the critical points that was determined from setting the derivative equal to 0 and observe the emotional increase and decrease trend. If your emotions go from increase to decrease, this is the high point, also known as maximum. If your emotions go from decrease to increase, this is the low point, also known as the minimum. Then you will plug these critical points back into your original function to determine the y-coordinates. How will I know if I have a relative or absolute max or min? Once you get your y-coordinates, the largest value will render this critical moment of your life an absolute maximum, whereas the smallest value is the absolute minimum. However, if events have occurred before and after this critical point, then it is also a relative maximum or minimum. Relative meaning a high or low point in an interval. If you plug in an endpoint, a point where you stop walking down this path, it could be an absolute maximum or minimum, but it can never be relative. This step is to verify that the y value of the critical point is indeed an absolute maximum or minimum. However, in your situation, this is not needed because it is clear you are adamant about continuing your path as a professional derivativer. It is important to remember that restrictions should be rejected as maximum or minimums, since these are boundaries that should never be touched. It is important to work on your response to adversity. There are two methods people usually respond, irrationally or rationally. The technical term is concave up and concave down. Concave up is when you are rationally considering a situation and clearly observing the pros and cons. Instead of rushing into a situation, you approach it cautiously and slowly lower your guard once you familiarize yourself. Concave down, on the other hand, is an irrational response. This means you rush into a situation without weighing the consequences. It is important that you understand yourself. How do you respond to difficulty? Well, I'm not too sure. That's okay. If you find the double derivative and set it equal to 0 and solve, you can determine the points needed to figure out if you are a concave up or a concave down type of person. To determine the double derivative, use the quotient rule. Factor by pulling up the smallest exponents and coefficients. By setting the denominator not equal to 0, you are determining the restrictions once again. Use the quadratic formula to solve for x. In your case, my therapeutic calculations indicate that the roots of your double derivative does not exist.
Created using Powtoon.